I was so tired of walking the streets, my shoes tapping restlessly against sidewalks and dusty roads, searching for a decent job that I began to believe my education meant absolutely nothing in this modern age. I had a university degree, but I quickly discovered that my diploma carried little weight unless I had connections. It was, in every sense, a time of nepotism, where only those who pulled strings or had important friends could guarantee employment. For months, I wandered in circles, CV in hand, until it finally dawned on me that without someone's recommendation, no employer was willing to give me a chance. From one interview to another, I heard the same line: "What prior experience do you have?" They asked it as if new graduates magically gain job history by snapping their fingers. I wanted to shout back, "How can I have work experience when no one will hire me in the first place?" Yet I could only stand there, my pride slowly shrinking as I nodded to their rejections. They wanted experienced candidates. They wanted people who had already proven themselves in previous roles. So how was someone fresh out of college ever meant to get a foot in the door? This became a maddening cycle, a never-ending loop that cost me a year of my life. For an entire year, I searched for work that would pay me enough to live on, but got nowhere. Watching everyone else move on with their lives while I remained stuck, I felt my self-esteem crack. My frustration grew day after day. Then came the blow I never saw coming. My aunt, my own Kala, made it brutally clear that she would never marry her daughter, Zainab, to me while I remained unemployed. The message was simple: no job, no wedding. Zainab was more than just my cousin. She was my childhood sweetheart and my dearest friend. Our families had always assumed we would end up married, but in a society where an unemployed man is seen as a liability, my aunt decided I was unfit for her daughter. She broke off our informal understanding and gave Zainab's hand to someone else, someone presumably with a stable source of income. That heartbreak was a wound unlike any other. It wasn't just the abrupt cancellation of a promise. It felt like my very reason to live had been ripped away. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Zainab smiling in someone else's arms. She had once hung on my every word when she believed I'd easily find a lucrative job with my degree. But as soon as fate decided otherwise, she brushed me aside, claiming, "You can't even provide a simple meal for me. How will you ever fulfill my real desires?" This cut deep. There I was, a man who had believed in love, only to be told that without money, my love was worthless. Zainab, the girl who once fluttered around me like a moth to a flame, now revealed her true colors, and I was consumed by the bitterness of betrayal. Through streaming tears, I realized that the world belonged to those who had money. If a man was poor, no one cared how genuine his heart might be. Anger and resentment replaced the sorrow I felt. From that day on, I carried a burning sense of injustice in my chest. My job search stagnated. My motivation nearly vanished, and I found myself drifting into questionable company. I started spending most of my days and nights loitering with friends who also lacked direction. We'd gather on street corners, in grimy cafes, or sometimes in the back rooms of snooker clubs, wasting hours chatting about our misfortunes, getting by on cheap cigarettes and lukewarm tea. My father noticed the change in me. He was a straightforward man, someone who had struggled all his life just to make ends meet. Now he saw his son, once his pride and joy, turning into a restless wanderer with no discipline. One evening after I came home late, he cornered me in the living room. His voice was stern as he said, "Farid, find a job or I swear I'll throw you out of this house. Enough of this aimless roaming around." I bristled, feeling that defensive anger tighten in my chest. "I want a decent job, Abba," I replied, desperation creeping into my tone. "I won't settle for something menial." "A decent job," he repeated with a bitter laugh. "Son, even if it's not the highest paying position, you need to start somewhere. You can't roam the streets forever. If you refuse smaller opportunities, how will you gain any experience? When I started working, I was no manager or businessman. We begin at zero and climb up. But to me, that zero felt like the end of the world. Pride lingered in the back of my mind. I had sacrificed so much for my degree, only to be told to take up a helper's or a delivery boy's position. My father's words stung, though I wanted to hurl an insult back at him. "You're still at zero yourself. but I would never dare speak to my father like that. Instead, I fumed silently and stormed out of the house, frustration fueling every step. Aimless and distraught, I ended up at my friend Sham's place. We were both from relatively humble backgrounds, but Shams had never seemed too worried about stable work. He had told me before that his mother made good money in some small business of her own, though I hadn't fully grasped what that entailed. When I arrived, I noticed a group of women in the drawing room. They seemed intensely focused on discussing something with Sham's mother. They were flipping through what looked like photos and every few minutes scribbling notes on notepads. Confused, I pulled Shams aside. "Who are these ladies?" I asked. "Oh," Shams replied with a casual shrug. "They're here because my mother arranges marriages. She's a matchmaker. Families come with their requests, like wanting a certain type of bride or groom, and my mother charges 20,000 rupees per successful match." I gaped. 20,000 for just introducing families to each other? A smirk crossed his face. Exactly. She doesn't do much more than connect people, maybe share a few pictures or phone numbers. If the families end up agreeing to the match, they pay her. No further responsibility. She doesn't guarantee the marriage will last or that the groom is actually a good person. She doesn't care. She gets her money either way. I peered into the drawing room again, this time with newfound fascination. One of the women handed a photograph to Sham's mother, likely of her son, while Sham's mother in turn picked a photo from her own pile. The potential match was apparently a young woman from another family. If these families decided to seal the proposal, Sham's mother could earn 20,000 from the bride's side and 20,000 from the groom's. A total of 40,000 rupees. All for a single referral. I was stunned. It seemed like an unbelievable windfall for minimal effort. Sham's mother didn't even look stressed. She simply jotted down phone numbers and addresses. After some pleasantries and negotiations, the visitors left, presumably to contact the girl's family. "See," Sham said, "this is why I don't bother finding a typical job. Mom's business covers all our needs." His words planted a seed in my mind. I was enthralled by the idea of easy money. It stirred something inside me. Maybe I could do the same thing. No overhead, no major skills required, I thought. Just match some families, earn thousands, and walk away with no accountability. My heart thumped with the possibility of finally finding not just a job, but a profitable gig that wouldn't demand years of experience or connections in the traditional sense. As I walked home, the idea churned in my head. If Shams's mother could do it from her living room, why couldn't I do something similar? I would appear professional, maybe even open my own small marriage bureau in a nicer part of the city. That would attract wealthier families. If it worked, I wouldn't have to worry about humiliating rejections or menial salaries anymore. I saw myself as someone who'd gather pictures, make a few phone calls, and earn more in a month than some people do in a year. That evening, when I got home, I found my mother waiting by the dining table. She looked relieved to see me return. "I've been waiting for you to eat," she said gently, concern lining her face. "You left so angry earlier. You know I worry about you." But my head was brimming with my newfound plan. Instead of complaining about my father's threats, I asked my mother about a neighbor's daughter, Nazat. A few days prior, I had overheard her mother worrying about a possible groom. Startled, my mother's eyebrows shot up. "You're already trying to replace Zainab with that girl? Let me remind you, you're still unemployed. It's not exactly easy to get engaged with no income." I rolled my eyes. "Ami, please. I'm not looking to marry Nazat. Her mother is looking for a suitable match. It occurred to me that maybe we could help them in that process." She shook her head in disbelief. "But you never liked our neighbors in the first place. The daughter was always complaining, and you disliked them visiting us. Now you want to stick your nose in their marriage affairs?" I grinned. "Hear me out, Ami. I have an idea." Carefully, I explained that I wanted to start a small marriage bureau, guiding families to potential matches. My mother was initially shocked. "You're a young man. How will you do the work typically done by older women?" "Times are changing," I countered. "Men run marriage bureaus too. Why shouldn't I? People pay significant fees for a simple introduction. If I can match even 2 families a day, that's thousands of rupees." Families will line up at our door, wanting us to help their daughters or sons find spouses. I could see my mother's skepticism melt as the financial potential dawned on her. She was tired of seeing me jobless, tired of hearing relatives criticize me for lacking ambition. If this marriage bureau idea meant I would finally earn real money, more than some trivial salary, maybe it was worth exploring. So she agreed to help me financially. We weren't rich, but she handed me enough savings to rent a tiny office space in a well-to-do district. I found a compact one-room office in a high-end neighborhood. The building itself was modest compared to surrounding offices, but it still bore the aura of luxury simply by virtue of location. I paid the deposit, set up a desk and 2 chairs, and mounted a large sign above the door that read, Fareed Marriage Bureau. To kick things off, I displayed a few photos of acquaintances, mostly just to create the impression that I already had a strong client roster. Even though some of these individuals weren't actually seeking matches, it gave the office a professional edge. Unexpectedly, it wasn't long before potential clients began stepping inside. Many, ironically, were from lower-income backgrounds. They believed that because my bureau was located in an affluent area, I must have a direct pipeline to wealthy families. They told me they wanted a well-settled bride or groom, preferably someone with a large business or a job overseas. Without blinking, they promised to pay significant fees if I could deliver such matches. This was precisely what I had hoped for, a flow of parents or guardians who believed I held the key to quality proposals. They'd give me pictures of their sons or daughters, sometimes listing demands. The groom should own a car and a house, or the bride must be from a family with a high status. Every day, I carefully collected these photos, building an expanding portfolio. I also began to realize that many families wanted to physically present their daughters to me so I could check for compatibility. Under the guise of making sure the prospective matches were suitable, I insisted on meeting the daughters directly. I'm sorry, I would say, feigning politeness, but in this modern age, pictures can be edited or heavily filtered. I need to see your daughter in person so I can truthfully describe her appearance and personality to a potential groom's family. This served my ulterior motive, evaluating which young women I could exploit. My heartbreak over losing Zainab had twisted into a burning resentment toward women who only sought wealthy suitors. I convinced myself that most girls, especially those visiting my bureau, were no different from Zainab, materialistic and eager to trade love for comfort. It was a toxic mindset, but once such bitterness takes root, it spreads like poison through the mind. At first, I simply took phone numbers and addresses, filled out forms detailing the daughter's age, complexion, education, and so on. But I soon discovered a sinister opportunity. Many of these girls, driven by the hope of a lavish future, were willing to come to my office alone. They trusted me to shape their profiles for prospective grooms. All I had to do was say, I need better photos, ones that capture you at your best, so wealthy families see your true worth. One afternoon, a shy young woman arrived with her father. She was demure, eyes lowered, wearing a simple outfit. Her father asked me to find a good match for her. I told him in a respectful tone that I needed some time to gather prospective families, but I also casually suggested that updated photographs would help. I pretended I had a professional photographer on call for precisely this reason. Her father nodded, though uncertain. Maybe I can bring her again next week, he offered. I seized the moment. If it's possible for her to come alone, we can get the photos done quickly and discreetly. Sometimes parents worry about gossip if they show their daughters in many places. He considered my suggestion. Perhaps he believed I was a caring professional, or maybe he felt cornered by the prospect that his daughter might miss out on a good match. In the end, he agreed. When the girl arrived alone 2 days later, I put on a benevolent smile. My photographer friend will be here shortly, I said, motioning her into a small, partitioned area I'd set up at the back of the office. We just need a few shots from different angles. Potential grooms' families might want close-ups and full-length pictures. She nodded, her voice barely audible. I took her dupatta from around her shoulders under the guise of adjusting it for the photos. I let her hair down, telling her it looked more attractive that way. My hand trembled slightly, but I hid my nervousness. Soon the lines of professionalism blurred, and I touched her more intimately than was ever appropriate, testing my boundaries. She looked uncomfortable but unsure what to do. After all, I was the professional caretaker of her future match, right? That was when my friend, the photographer, snapped a few standard pictures, then casually excused himself, claiming he had to fetch different camera equipment. I made sure to lock the door behind him. Returning to the girl, I offered her a glass of juice, spiked with a sedative. She drank it unsuspectingly, the tension in her eyes not fully registering the danger. Within minutes, her eyelids drooped and she slumped against the chair. Shaking with adrenaline, I exploited her vulnerability. It was my first time taking that dark step. A mix of guilt and triumph warred in my chest, but my bitterness toward women like Zainab overshadowed any moral hesitations. I reasoned that this was a form of revenge for every selfish, materialistic girl out there. This girl just happened to be a casualty of my fury. When she eventually woke up, confused and disoriented, tears welled in her eyes. She seemed to realize something terrible had happened, but I threatened her with the possibility of blackmail. If you ever speak about what went on here, I have pictures that can ruin your life, I lied. Sobbing, she remained silent. I assured her that I would finalize a match for her the very next day, which I did, arranging her marriage to a well-off man who had previously contacted me. She left in tears, her innocence shattered, but with a ring soon to be on her finger. That single act opened the floodgates of my darkest impulses. I set a formal fee for my services, 25,000 rupees for each match collected from both sides. So if I successfully arranged a wedding, I pocketed 50,000. That was more than I could have made in months at a standard job. My father, initially suspicious, noticed how quickly my finances improved. My mother reveled in the sight of me coming home with wads of cash. They assumed I was merely an excellent matchmaker in a high-end district. They had no idea about my cunning, nor the unspeakable acts behind closed doors. From that point on, I refined my tactics. I advertised my bureau more vigorously, leaving flyers in shops and cafes around the wealthy neighborhood. I ran small newspaper ads touting my successful track record in matching families. This drew more foot traffic, more parents clutching their children's photographs, and more naive young women stepping in my door. For those who wanted wealth above all else, I dangled the promise of well-established grooms. I'd say, a man with a business overseas is looking for a wife. He's highly selective. I need flawless pictures of you, or maybe even a short meeting with you in person, so I can gauge your compatibility. The more I flattered them, the more they complied. Each time I had the same horrifying setup: a locked office, a spiked drink, a few hours of their unconsciousness, and a lifetime of secrets. In many cases, I actually did help finalize marriages. My success stories became marketing gold. People started praising me as a miracle worker who could find matches in just a week or two. The money rolled in, and so did the unsettling satisfaction that I was teaching a lesson to any woman fixated on marrying into wealth. Twisted as it sounds, I felt justified, as though I was punishing them for rejecting men like me, men who had no money but plenty of sincerity. At home, my parents stopped nagging me to find a stable job. They bragged to relatives that I had a flourishing business. My father even joked once, "Fareed's better off than any government employee." My mother, still hurt by how my aunt ended my engagement with Zainab, wanted to show off our newfound prosperity. She began searching for a beautiful, well-educated bride for me, hoping to flaunt it in front of my aunt. If my father suspected any wrongdoing in my success, he kept silent. It was ironic. My mother was out there, scouring distant connections, trying to bring me the very type of girl I typically preyed upon in my office. I found it amusing, if a bit disconcerting. Deep down, I knew the reason I was so fixated on humiliating these young women was that I'd never gotten over Zainab's betrayal. I wanted retribution for the heartbreak that robbed me of my self-worth. Even though months had passed, I still burned with anger every time I recalled how easily Zainab dismissed me. One day, a poised, elegant woman entered my office, her daughter's photo clutched in her hands. She introduced herself politely, explaining she wanted a highly suitable match for her child, Fiza. Placing the picture on my desk, she said, "I'm willing to pay extra if you can ensure my daughter marries into a wealthy household." I glanced at the photo. My heart skipped a beat. The girl, Fiza, was mesmerizingly beautiful. I felt an immediate jolt of desire, even though I had barely seen more than a two-dimensional image. Determined to secure this case for myself, I spoke kindly. Don't worry, Auntie. With a daughter this lovely, she'll have no shortage of potential proposals. I'm very selective, and I'll find the right groom soon. Her mother exhaled in relief, handing me an advance of 10,000 rupees. Over the next couple of days, I mulled over my usual plan. Ask Fiza to come alone, spike her drink, and satiate my lust. Yet something in me also toyed with the notion that she could become my wife. Even so, my baser impulses had grown so strong that I didn't want to wait until marriage. My pattern of exploitation had become almost routine. After 2 days, I called Fiza, claiming, I have an extremely wealthy proposal lined up for you, but the groom's family wants to see top-quality photographs. She was quick to agree to a meeting at my office in the evening. It was then that I felt a flicker of excitement and greed. When Fiza arrived, my entire office seemed to brighten. She was even more stunning in person. Her eyes held a quiet confidence, her features graceful. I immediately pictured her as someone I wanted to conquer, to own. I greeted her warmly, offered her a seat, and, as was my usual tactic, handed her a glass of juice laced with a sedative. Then, to avoid suspicion, I made small talk with another family who had come for a separate proposal. Eventually, the other family left, and I returned to Fiza. I expected the sedative to have taken effect by now. Usually, after 15 minutes or so, the victim would show signs of drowsiness. But Fiza appeared calm, not the least bit tired. She reached into her purse, retrieving a chocolate bar. I love chocolate, she remarked with a friendly smile. Would you like some? I hesitated, worried that if she ate something else, it might slow the sedative's absorption. So I took the entire chocolate bar from her, swiftly chomping it down to ensure she wouldn't mix that sweetness with the drug juice. Satisfied, I let her keep talking, confident she'd be unconscious soon enough. But a strange dizziness crept over me instead. My vision blurred, and my head felt like it was spinning in slow motion. I stumbled, fighting to stay upright, but the room began tilting. Panicked thoughts flickered. Is the sedative reacting in some unexpected way? Within minutes, everything went black. When I eventually woke up, I was alone in my office, sprawled on the floor, lightheaded and disoriented. Fiza was gone. For a long moment, I could barely recall what had happened. Then, horror struck me. I must have ingested the sedative. My phone buzzed on the desk. Shakily, I reached for it. A flood of messages awaited, each containing pictures. Explicit pictures of me, unconscious in humiliating poses. My breath caught in my throat. Before I could gather my thoughts, my phone rang. Fiza's name appeared on the screen. With a trembling hand, I answered. Her voice was calm, yet edged with a fury I could sense through every syllable. How does it feel, Fareed? All this time, you've been drugging unsuspecting girls to fulfill your vile needs. Now you know exactly what it's like to be on the receiving end. Let's see how you enjoy it. My mouth went dry. What? What did you do? She laughed, the sound chilling. I replaced your sedative with my own. That chocolate bar had a drug meant to knock you out. I knew you'd forcibly take it if I offered it casually. It worked like a charm, didn't it? The pictures flashed in my mind again, shame crawling through my veins. If you try to expose me, I threatened shakily, I'll ruin your name. I'll ruin my name, she cut in, voice dripping with cold amusement. You have nothing on me. You didn't even get a chance to do your usual game. Meanwhile, I have plenty on you, enough photos to plaster across the internet. In a few hours, everyone in your world will see them. Then they'll understand how you play with others' honor. My heart thudded. Why are you doing this? I whispered. What do you want from me? She let out a scornful sigh. You still don't realize who I am, do you? Let me educate you. I'm the cousin of that girl you first attacked, the one you drugged and forced into a marriage that fell apart on her wedding night, the one who was ostracized, humiliated, and eventually labeled impure. Everything spun. Memories clawed at me. My first victim, the quiet one whose father had brought her in. I had threatened her into silence. She'd never told me about any cousin in the police force. I stammered, but she never said anything. Fiza's voice trembled with fury. She kept it locked inside until I forced the truth out of her. After you violated her, she married a man you arranged for her, But on the wedding night, it was discovered she wasn't a virgin. The scandal erupted. In panic, she confessed everything to her new husband, who divorced her on the spot, only hours into the marriage. Imagine the trauma of being returned to her parents in utter disgrace. Rumors spread. People called her a sinful woman who deserved to be abandoned. She spent months locked in her room, battling shame and depression. You destroyed her life, and she's just one of many. I sank to my knees. My mind reeled. Sure, I'd known the girls I abused would bear shame, but I'd never confronted the grim reality of what happened afterward. I'm sorry, I managed, voice cracking. Please, don't do this. We can settle this quietly. I'll do anything. For a moment, there was only silence on the line. Then Fiza's voice came back, icy and resolute. You think an apology can fix my cousin's life? Or the countless other girls you've harmed? I want everyone to see what kind of monster you are. I'm going to publicize these photos and file an official complaint. You won't hide behind your marriage bureau facade anymore. True to her word, Fiza wasted no time. By the end of the day, my phone was exploding with calls from friends, acquaintances, and even distant relatives. Fareed, what the hell are these pictures? Some asked me, their voices laced with shock or disgust. Others simply cursed at me. My once carefully constructed image was in pieces. The explicit evidence of my unconscious, half-dressed form circulated widely on social media platforms and messaging groups. Then came the final blow. The police arrived at my bureau. They had an arrest warrant, bolstered by Fiza's complaint, her photographic evidence, and statements from other victims she had apparently encouraged to come forward. Girls I had terrorized with blackmail now found the courage to speak up. As I was led away in handcuffs, I caught sight of a small crowd gathered outside. My father stood at the edge, face etched in horror. My mother clutched her scarf, tears streaming down her cheeks. The neighbors peered from windows, some pointing and gossiping. The neon Fareed Marriage Bureau sign overhead felt like a sick joke. Everything was unraveling in front of me. The investigation and subsequent trial were merciless. Fiza provided a trove of digital evidence, testimonies, phone records, pictures of sedatives, and more. She'd done her homework, gathering enough proof to tear down my entire operation. Dozens of young women, some accompanied by anxious families, testified that I tricked them into meeting me alone, spiked their drinks, and coerced them into silence by threatening to tarnish their reputations. For the first time, I truly faced the damage I had wrought. One father, trembling with rage, described how his daughter had suffered panic attacks since her encounter with me. Another mother sobbed, saying her child's engagement had broken off once rumors spread that she was compromised. The judge listened intently, asking pointed questions. My defense lawyer tried to argue technicalities, but the overwhelming evidence and the emotional accounts of the victims overshadowed any legal maneuvering. When the verdict was announced that I was guilty of multiple counts of sexual assault, the entire courtroom felt like it was suffocating me. I received a 3-year prison sentence. People demanded a harsher punishment, but that was the sentence delivered. My mother cried so hard I thought she might collapse. My father didn't even look my way. He just stared at the floor, hands trembling in clenched fists. I've been behind bars for 6 months now. There's a rhythmic clanking of metal doors in prison that reminds me every day of my lost freedom. My cell is cramped and unremarkable. Chipped concrete walls, a narrow bunk bed, a single overhead light that flickers occasionally. The food is bland, the guards stoic. But the hardest part is not the physical discomfort. It's the crushing guilt and shame that weigh on my mind. I think back on how my thirst for revenge against Zainab, for choosing a richer man, spiraled into something monstrous. I told myself that I was punishing shallow women, but in truth, I was punishing innocent people for something they never did to me personally. I let my heartbreak fester into hatred, ignoring any moral line. Eventually, I was so consumed by bitterness that I was too blind to see I was destroying not just others' lives, but also my own. My mother's last letter expressed how she barely steps out of the house now. Everyone stares at her, whispers behind her back. My father, once stern and proud, has become silent. His health deteriorates as he grapples with the humiliation I caused him. Even if I'm released early for good behavior, how will I face them? Or society? The entire city knows my name in the worst possible context. Sometimes I wonder about those girls whose futures I stole. The one who was divorced on her wedding night especially haunts me. No matter how many times I quietly pray or how genuinely I regret what I did, nothing can undo the nightmares she must endure. 3 years in prison is trivial compared to the lifelong trauma inflicted upon her. I used to claim I was teaching a lesson, but all I did was spread ruin. In the gloom of my cell, I've come to realize a single truth. Revenge is a fire that devours the one who ignites it. When your heart is set on vengeance, you lose sight of right and wrong. Every shred of empathy is stripped away, replaced by a twisted sense of justification. By the time you realize your mistakes, it's often too late. I share my story not to solicit sympathy, indeed I deserve none, but to warn anyone who harbors bitterness or resentment. Heartbreak comes for many of us, but letting it transform into hatred and vengeance is a poison that corrodes your soul. It's easy to justify cruelty when you feel you've been cruelly treated, but that path leads only to self-destruction. Had I used my so-called marriage bureau honestly, merely connecting families and taking a fair fee, I might have built a legitimate business. I might have gained the respect of my community. Who knows? Maybe I'd have eventually found a partner who loved me for who I was. Instead, I let my hatred for one woman's betrayal become a vendetta against countless others, burying me under scandal and condemnation. Zainab is long gone, likely living her own life somewhere, but the chaos I unleashed continues to ripple. Parents now hesitate to trust any matchmaker. Families are more wary, double-checking every detail, and the young women I abused struggle to rebuild their lives. Some in therapy, some still haunted by the shame I forced upon them. My father might never recover from the blow to his pride. My mother, once so hopeful, now wonders where she went wrong raising me. Whenever I reflect on my actions, a suffocating sense of regret overtakes me. If only I could turn back time to the day my aunt rejected me. I would let myself mourn losing Zainab, then seek out simpler ways to earn a living, or perhaps take my father's advice and start with a humble job. Instead, I chose the darkest path possible. Now I sit in prison for a total of 3 years. 6 months are behind me, with the rest still ahead. During these nights, staring at the cramped ceiling, I vow never to repeat such depravity, though I doubt anyone outside these walls believes my remorse is genuine. Perhaps it's just punishment for a man who built an entire business on lies, manipulation, and sexual violence. When I am eventually released, I will face a different world. My name is forever tainted. My father, if he's still alive, may not meet my eyes. The home I left might not feel like home anymore. But that is a consequence I must accept, a direct result of the cruelty I unleashed. To anyone reading these words, don't feed the flames of revenge. Heartbreak can be excruciating, but you do not have the right to shatter the lives of others because of your own bitterness. Suffering will come full circle, as it did for me, leaving you with ruin beyond imagination. If there's a lesson in my downfall, it's that no matter how tempting it is to blame the world for your misfortune, you cannot let that anger transform you into a monster. I share this testimony as a cautionary tale, hoping that even one person might step back from the edge of vengeance. Let my story be a grim reminder that those who burn with hatred are consumed by their own fire.